And so yeah, our first number one reason that you can't live without Dante, for me, is redundancy. The next one would be that it's easy to use and that it's flexible. So let's look into like, what does that actually mean? So what is redundancy? Why do we need it? And one of the things that I think about is, especially if you're in the live industry, you're not using sort of just any old microphone system. If you're doing wireless, you're using some of the top of the line stuff like ULXC, Axion, D6000. These systems have all kinds of things in place to make sure that you don't have any dropouts whatsoever, all types of things going on. It would be such a shame if someone just tripped over a cable and ripped everything out, right? So that's why we want to have a system that we have all types of backups and things like that in our system. And we also want it to be really easy to set up, right? We don't want to have we don't have all day to set these things up. Well, maybe we do, but let's pretend we don't. So these things are, like we said, they're ideal for mission critical setups, right? So for systems where dropouts just aren't acceptable, like I said, with like the Shure Axion, which is described oftentimes as like the salespeople went to the engineers and said, I need a system that doesn't drop out ever, right? And that's what they came up with. So this is like sort of our answer to that, right? So again, Dante products offer primary and secondary networks. And so if you have a network cable that falls over, a switch that falls over, someone spills a drink. I worked in a nightclub. That has happened many a time. And with an analog system, you're SOL. There's only so much that you can do about that. But when you've got a whole other set of systems backing you up, you won't even notice the dropouts. Of course, we've got this simple setup and deployment using a secondary port on the board, all of these devices already. There's so little like setup actually required in Dante controller to get that up and going. And there's no separate configuration required for the secondary network. Once you've set up your entire system, that is just replicated on your secondary network with no additional setup required from you. And best practices are actually really simple. There's not a whole lot of them because it's very simple to set up. You just have your completely independent cabling, no crossover if possible. We'd like them to be completely separate. You can have your first network be converged, but it's ideal that your secondary network is standalone, because if it is falling over to your secondary network, you don't actually know which aspect of it caused your primary network to fall over. So it's ideal if you have your secondary network not be converged because, again, you don't know. You're already in your backup system. You want to keep it as simple as possible. So what does redundancy actually look like? Well, our physical setup here, we have our primary network connected to our source, our mixer, and a couple of amplifiers. And we've got our secondary literally connected exactly the same to our same sources and amplifiers and mixing desk, so that when we lose our first one, that's absolutely fine because we have a second connection. This kind of goes hand in hand with sort of Dante's whole, like, it's not just a protocol, it's a whole solution, right? So